Good morning, and thank you all for coming today. What a wonderful honor it is to be here. And we were heads together just a moment ago who was going to speak first. So it's me. And I'm going to do my very best not to have a fanboy moment now or at any time during the next 45 minutes, but it could happen, so if it does, just please bear with us. As the moderator said when he was introducing us, she's written 22 books, 3 different series, a group of standalones, and as I was browsing through her considerable body of work in the weeks leading up to this, I had a big question as a fellow writer. All of these series involve very distinct characters, and all of these characters have such distinct voices. And you're doing them all at the same time. How do you keep all these voices straight?
That's a great question. It's actually, hi, y'all, it's nice to see you. It's actually quite easy. I mean, think about your family, think about your friends. When they speak, you hear them. Mm-hmm. These are my family and friends. These are the people that I spend the most time with outside of my husband and my cats. So it's very easy for me to keep them straight. Now, names, eye colors, those kinds of things, hair, that's a little more difficult. That I have to keep pretty tight rein on. But Taylor's a lot like me.
Okay.
So that's easy. The standalones are really where the big challenge is, because you have to get to know all of them and really dive into them in the same amount of time as you're writing a series book. So they're the more difficult ones.
Okay, good to know.
All right, so we're going to go back and forth and ask each other questions and get to know each other while you get to know us. So I started reading your work, and I was very impressed.
Thank you.
I don't come across new procedurals that blow me away very often, and I'm really into these books. I want to know, first off, the title.
I'm having the fanboy moment. You can say, I need a fan, in fact. Yeah. Okay.
How do you come? What is the river in the titles?
Okay.
And is that going to be a theme throughout all of them?
To answer your second question first, I don't know, although I am toying with ideas for a third title at the moment. The first one, which is now Dark River Rising, started out as a change in the game, which is so utterly boring and so awful. And eventually I was asked to come up with a title, and I came up with Dark River. And the woman who was editing my book said, you know, that sounds almost right. Let's make it kinetic so it feels like something's happening. Let's add an ing word to it, Dark River Rising. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And I get the question about the river, what is it? In a sense, it's metaphoric, but my books are set in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which is also known as River City. It's right there on the mighty Mississippi, which plays sort of a background role in the book. But in this first book, there are rivers of data that one of the characters has to wade through to find out something important. And there are rivers of unlawful drugs flowing into the city, which is sort of the background for the entire story. So that's where it came from.
Since you're right there, tell us about Wallace.
Wallace came to me in pieces. I originally wrote the book. Wallace is a homicide detective. She is in her mid-30s, and when I first wrote the book, the character was male. And I couldn't figure out why I could never get past page 70 or 80 with this book, but over and over again, in and out of the drawer, I would get to the same spot and it would grind to a halt. And then one day, the little voice in my head said, you need to audition a woman for that job. Really? So I did, and that was the thing that changed everything for me. It made me realize I was writing a story about somebody and not a story about some idea that I had had, which, in my defense, I was an academic at the time. You get an idea, you write a book, it's a textbook, no one's ever going to want to read it. So I changed it. I realized, okay, I'm writing about somebody who's dealing with this idea. And I went from there. The book got written. I asked my wife to read it. She said, yeah, this is fine. The story works well, but your character is still a guy. You need help, and it's not going to be me. So I joined a women's writing group. They taught me how to write this character. I literally took lessons for a year on how to do this. I learned a lot. They taught me how to write this character, and all praise to the Decatur Women's Writing Group for showing me the way.
Is she based on anyone? Because you've done, it was one of the things I wanted to talk about actually, is how well you've written a female lead. Which is, it's not that men can't write women and women can't write men, but to be inside of the female psyche. Now, cops are a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
They have a little, they're not wearing Laura Ashley and trying to throw a dinner party. They're doing something a lot more intense. But you've done a really, really good job with it.
Thank you.
So is she based on anyone?
She's based on no one. When I realized that I was going to have to write this book and it was going to have to be about this woman named Wallace Hartman, she just showed up one day. And I'm certain that there are pieces of people that I know embedded in this character, but I don't really know where she came from. But she showed up, and she's never far from me now. She seems to be constantly hovering on the margins of my thoughts, even when I'm not sitting and trying to write the next book about her.
Yeah, she's your friend.
Yeah, so it's a voice in my head.
It's interesting, two things that you have realized. You've written two. I assume
Yes.
you're working on a third.
I am.
Okay. For you to realize as early as you did that you have to write about somebody and not something, and to recognize early on something is not working with my book, that is huge. That is something that usually a new writer is not going to conceptualize. It's going to be an editor that comes in and says, this doesn't work, you have to fix this. For you to figure that out yourself is huge. I am in the midst of changing a book that I am 90,000 words in now, from third present tense to first person. And you would think that this many books in, I would know how to write a story, how to write a character, what voice to be in, what point of view. But the past two books, I've had to, at this point, I'll stop, go back, and redo. The last one was a tense, and this was a point of view. So kudos to you for figuring it out early.
Thank you. It was just literally a voice out of the heavens that did it for me. But I did want to ask you that same question, because I read that in your interviews and on your website, that you made these changes. And just as someone who's trying to learn how this goes, the book writing process, what signals were you getting from these stacks of pages in front of you that pointed directly to that, change the tense, change the point of view? Because that seems like I would never have thought of that. I probably could have looked at the book forever and it never would have spoken to me. How did you see that?
I was on a bacon date with another writer. That's what we call it when we go to breakfast together. We go out for bacon.
I'm going to use that.
But you're really writing that down.
Wallace is going to have a bacon date. Thank you.
So we were on a bacon date, and I was a good solid 85,000 words into this book, and something was just wrong. It was big. It was the biggest book I had ever written. I knew that I had at least another 20,000, and it turned out to be, it was even bigger than that. But it was slow, and I was whining because the book was slow, and something was wrong, and because that's also what we do on bacon dates. That's our therapy sessions with each other. And she said, well, why don't you just change the tense? I'm like, all right. And then I went home, I'm like, uh-oh, that's a really good idea. And I took a chapter and I changed it, and it just took off.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those, it's like, wow, that's something that I need to do. And I changed the whole thing, and it made a very big book with a lot of digging deep into a character and their psyche. It made it take off and go fast. So, pacing is very important with a thriller novel, obviously. You can't, it can't be very thrilling if people are yawning and falling asleep. You have to turn the page. My job is to make you stay up really late and be late for work the next day. That's my job. And it was not going to do that.
But I mean, that's a lot of stuff to think through, and it's frightening. We'll just change the tense. That's like saying, why don't you just remodel the freeways in downtown Birmingham or something,
Yeah.
But it will make things go faster, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and the fun thing is, you have, instead of a capital plan and a budget and a tax raise and all of those things, a penny on gas, and build that over the next 15, 20 years, you have a month. I had a month.
A month. But think of all the anxiety that you had to go along with it, too. There's a fund of anxiety that goes along with every word and every paragraph and every page.
Sure.
Yeah. Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to know, you're a lawyer.
A long, long time ago.
Long time ago.
Yes, not since 1987, to be technical about it.
Did it help you putting together the procedural aspects?
It did. I practiced the ultra exciting field of financial institutions law. If there are any Regulation Z experts in the audience, I'll be happy to chat with you about recent developments after this. But early in my career, I worked for a general practice firm, and we represented a lot of alleged criminals. And I got to go to the jails, and I got to sit in on interrogations, and I got to watch the police do their thing. So I did keep that in my head all this time. These books that I'm writing, though, are not, as you probably know, are not forensic, and they are forensically based, and they are police procedurals, but the stories really are about this woman, this character, Wallace Hartman, who happens to be a police officer. So I'm trying to tell the story from the point of view of how does she deal with this as an individual, and mainly because I don't know enough about the police work itself. But yes, the short answer to your question is yes, all of that stuff is still there in my head. Well, it's a lot of noise. There's a lot of noise in my head. I guess that makes me an introvert because the noise is there and it's constantly dinning.
Did you do any? I'm sorry, my mic just dropped out. Did you do any sort of research? Did you go on ride-alongs? Did you just online? Did you talk to people? What did you do to make it real?
I called one of the men that I practiced law with a long, long time ago to ask him some questions about procedure, about how suspects are handled and things like that. But the only research I did was into the illegal cocaine industry, which is what Dark River Rising is. That's the backdrop for it, is a change in the illegal cocaine industry. And this man wrote this book called Narconomics, where he went down and studied the whole business from the growers to the whole bit. And he, thank God, put a lot of footnotes in this book. So it was easy for me to do the research on that. But that was really the only place that I did any focused, get down in the books kind of a thing. The rest of it was just this woman and this really bizarre crime. So, a question for you. In your two standalone books, Lie to Me and Tear Me Apart, and they are your two newest books that are out at the moment, both stories and both sets of characters deal with a theme that is a constant fascination for me, and that is the secret life. We all have one that's usually pretty innocuous, but that's not the case in crime fiction. Where does this impulse for the secret life come from for you? Because it's beautifully done. I'm not going to say enough to spoil it, but it's beautifully done, and it's frightening. Which it's supposed to be.
I do not have a bunch of hands buried in my backyard.
That was my next question.
Just make sure everybody understands that. No, it's...
Nothing in the freezer that the
Nothing in
police
the
need to know
freezer.
about? Okay.
I don't know. That's a really good question. Nobody has ever asked me that. There is something about closed doors, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you are driving down the street, I don't know about you, but I love to go and drive around the neighborhoods, and every door I see, I imagine and wonder what's happening behind that door. Who are those people? When I was a kid, when I was a little bitty kid, my parents used to take us on road trips, and my mom, she tells me all the time, I would sit there and say, but who's at the front of the line of the cars? Somebody has to be the first in line. And that, you guys fix it? Great, thank you. Thank you, that's better.
Is it on?
It's on.
Huh?
It's a conspiracy. I could just keep sort of shouting. Is that okay? Is it back on? Yay, there we go. So I wanted to know who was leading the cars. And I would just envision somewhere in Maine, because the U.S. stops there, so no, it couldn't be somebody in Canada, but maybe they were driving up to the Arctic Circle. I mean, it was one of those bizarre little curiosities as a kid. And then I started wondering, who are the people in the cars? What are they doing? And of course, I'm asking my mom this, and she's like, would you read your book? Would you just read your book? I spent a lot of time being told, why don't you just go read? Go read in your room. Okay. So it's just a natural curiosity of, and I guess we're in the South, I might as well just say it, I'm just nosy. I am nosy. I want to know people's secrets. And I like being a secret keeper. I mean, people tell me things, and I'm a vault. I mean, if you tell me something and say, don't say anything, I don't. But
She promised. I did. She promised. So if it shows up later, I'll know where it came
no,
from.
I swear, if somebody says don't say anything, I don't say anything. But it's really kind of one of those interesting things that if you open somebody's door, nothing that you think is happening inside someone's house is what's really happening. Somebody that you think is awful, you know, they might be crying. Somebody that you think is fabulous, they might be crying. You know, it's just one of those things. So it's an overactive imagination. And then, you know, I have my own little version of a secret life. I write under a pseudonym. I don't have my real name out in the world. I hide that. So maybe that has a little bit of something to do with it as well, that I'm hiding my own stuff.
Okay. But it fascinates me. It's a very Hitchcockian thing, this idea that the surface is really just a pose, and it's always that way. I mean, you dig into most people and you're not going to find anything scandalous or awful, but sometimes these people, especially it seems like in your books, these are people that you make us like them and love them and adore them, and then you give us a peek behind the curtain and it's like, oh.
I think Mr. Stevenson said it very well last night, that we contain multitudes. All of us do. There's more than meets the eye. Every cliche you have ever heard fits. We have skeletons in our closet. There's more to them, all of that. Don't judge a book by its cover. And now we live in this bizarre society where we curate our lives for the public. We put things online that we want people to think about us, to see about us. And it's really taken this kind of what's happening behind the closed door to a completely different level, and it's really twisted, and it's great for a suspense writer because, I can follow somebody's feed who's a complete stranger and learn everything about them. There's a really fantastic book out right now, and it's been made into a TV show called You, Carolyn Klepnes. I think that's how you say her name. I may be saying it wrong. And that's exactly what he meets a girl, and he goes and he looks her up. And sure enough, there he is. There she is. Everything about her. He learns who her family is. He learns where she lives. I mean, we are so unguarded with our privacy that it's something that doesn't even exist.
Right.
That's something fun to dig into for me.
And hide. Yes.
And hide.
Yes. And you
And
do it
hide.
very well. In your research, in my research of your research, I discovered that you have been present for quite a few autopsies, but almost in the same breath you mentioned, yeah, and I also got in touch with some survivalists. So which one of those was a scarier experience?
Honestly, the autopsies. Because I grew up in Colorado. I grew up out in the woods. Where literally, the beef man would come at the beginning of the season, and you would take your side of beef they would package it all up, and we'd put it in the freezer, and that was our food for the winter. We literally, when it snowed, we were there by ourselves for a week.
Wow.
So the survivalists don't frighten me at all. I did enough research for that book that I'm maybe a wee bit of a prepper myself now.
Okay.
And then we had the flood in Nashville in 2010, and we got caught flat-footed. And we were stranded for 3 days with not enough water, not enough food. We had no cell phone service, no electricity, all of that. So, no, they didn't. They were fine.
How do you get in touch with, just not that I'm planning to, but let's say I needed to know, how do you go about getting in touch with survivalists? It's not like it's listed in the yellow pages.
Well, it's online.
Is it
It's
really?
online, sure. There's a really great blog, SHTF. And there's also, I can't say the whole acronym. End of the world as we know it. That's one of the great acronyms that they use. But the SHTF, that's the shit hits the fan blog. And I know, sorry. I don't know can I say that?
It's done.
It's been done. It's over.
It's actually
It's
on
over.
camera.
Oh no. Sorry, Mom. I just reached out to them and talked to them and started getting into the message boards. And I do a lot of research. Every single time I start a new book, I go to my Google search and I type in, I am a writer, I am doing research. And I hit go, just so they know. And trust me, they have been in my computers. I have researched things that I probably shouldn't, and have gotten myself into things I probably shouldn't be looking at. But that's the fun of doing this. I mean, you have places to go with your writing. Just imagine the things that you're going to start digging into and finding, and it's really fun.
It is. You're right.
Creepy as
Yeah.
all get out, but fun.
As long as the FBI doesn't show up.
Yeah. I had a top secret security clearance ages ago, so I have to hope that when they pull my file, they do see that they have talked to everybody from my kindergarten teacher to everywhere, that I am truly safe. But when you decide to take down Air Force One, it draws their attention.
Yes. The chair over.
What's a nice girl like you, right?
Yeah.
What's the hardest part about writing for you?
That's a good question. Some days it's the composing the story part. Some days it's the editing part. I'm kind of a nerd in the editing department. It's the part that I like the most, but some days it stymies me. I'm not one of these people that can get their thoughts out clearly on the page at the first go. It's always something very, very approximate. And I might spend a long time nudging the words of a sentence or a paragraph into position, killing things here, bringing things back there, and just sort of working with it until it sounds right in my head, because I'm one of those readers that when I'm reading it, I'm sounding it still in my head. And if it doesn't have a rhythm to it, and if the syllables don't hit the meter the way I want them to, I just can't leave it alone. So I would say for me, the hardest part is letting go of that tendency to want to fiddle with something until I've just fiddled it completely to death.
Who was
No
it
pun
that
intended.
said that they spent the whole day putting the comma in and then taking the comma out?
Me? That was me, under a pseudonym. Yeah. No, but it is almost like that because I agonize over everything, and I worry that someone will read it and think bad of me, that well, you could have just taken the extra 10 seconds to fix that. What about you? What's the hardest part for you?
Obviously, the tense. Picking the right tense. I love writing. It's what I was meant to do. It's what I wanted to do. I got sidetracked and ended up back in it. And the day that I sat down, I'm like, I'm going to write a book. And I wrote that first paragraph, and I hit the period, and I read it back to myself, and I burst into tears because that's what I was meant to do. So the writing itself isn't hard. It's the distraction of the rest of writing. I write fast. I have been a full-time writer since I started. Thank goodness. Thank you, husband. And so the writing itself, I love. Even a horrible day. It's kind of like pizza. Even a bad pizza is still pizza. Even a bad day writing, I'm still writing. And it's a gift, and it's something that I refuse to squander, and it's the only thing that I'm good at. So.
That can't be true.
But the rest of it is hard.
Are there any characters or storylines that didn't make the cut in some of your books that you harbor a secret ambition to resurrect someday?
I have I have 2 series that need to resurrect at some point. I get the fan mail that I get. I don't get a lot of fan mail, but the fan mail that I get is always, when are you going to bring back Taylor? When are you going to finish Sam? You left us on a cliffhanger, you big jerk. Which I send to my editor and say, they really want me to do this. And they're like, write your standalones. Don't worry about the tense. Yes, I have a major subplot. That
Really?
has to. I've toyed. Should I write it as a novella? Should I write it as a whole story of its own, a short story? Should I leave it alone? I pulled it out of one book that was a subplot. It just wasn't working for the book. I firmly believe that your story tells you what to put in it. So I go with the subconscious. If it's there, it's supposed to be there, and I will agonize over why it's there and figure out a way to make that work for the story instead of cutting. I refuse to cut anything except for this one subplot that I'm going to have to readdress. What about you?
My story said kill all these people, and my editor said, no, you are not a motorcycle gang. It's not kill them all, let God sort them out. You have to bring this person and this person back to life, and then you have to get rid of this. I'd never thought about doing that before. And it worked. It was much better that way. But I think the tendency, especially as a first-time crime fiction writer, is let's go out and, put some crime on the page. That was what my story was telling me, pull the trigger. And again, but I brought them back. I did it exactly. I asked for a lot of instruction on that. I got it. And I have to say, she knew exactly what she was talking about. Thank goodness. Because I was not seeing that at all.
Isn't it fascinating, the forest for the trees that we live with? I mean, we're so into the story that we can't see anything outside of it. That's where having a fantastic editor or a beta reader or somebody that you trust that is not your mom, who isn't going to just say, oh, it's so good. Oh, you should publish that. Somebody who's a professional who can see these little threads that we lay down that we don't even realize are there. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly vital.
Yes, it is. Because we're thinking about it in just one way, get to the finish line, right?
Yeah. You write about Baton Rouge.
Yes.
Baton Rouge.
That's it.
I always
That's
say
perfect.
Baton Rouge.
No, that's perfect.
Why?
There are a lot of reasons why. First of all, most people who write fiction set in Louisiana put it either in New Orleans or in Cajun country. And they're both fine places, but I lived in Baton Rouge for 10 years. I loved it. It was a great, beautiful, dangerous place. So I'm on a one-man, I know, I've heard that before. I was interviewed a few months ago, and I said the same thing, and the guy stopped me. He said, no one ever puts Baton Rouge and interesting in the same sentence, okay? So let's start over. I know, but that was his shtick. He was looking for a way, because he was interviewing several people at the same time. He's looking for a way to poke you in the eye and then see what you'll do. But I'm just sort of on a one-man mission to, bring some respect to Baton Rouge, because I didn't grow up I wasn't raised in Baton Rouge, but I grew up there. That's where I went away to college and law school, and I had a lot of early work experiences there that changed me. Working for that firm where I got to meet all of those alleged drug dealers and alleged killers, one of whom is alleged to have killed his co-conspirator in another murder. He was not a very nice man. But Baton Rouge changed me in a lot of ways. I had a job right out of college where I worked in a dangerous part of town amongst very dangerous people. These people did this incredibly difficult job, and there was some sort of personal violence that took place between some of these people every day. And it was the kind of thing where we're just talking and everything's fine, and a few seconds later you can see the heat starting to build up, and then a punch is thrown, or somebody swings something at somebody, and then it's over. And I'd never seen anything like that before. The violence, the act itself was over, but the aftermath of it stayed in the air between these people and in this workforce forever. And being around that on a daily basis for someone who is eventually going to become a crime fiction writer, dangerous stories in a dangerous place, that's the only part of the book that never changed, was where it was going to be set. In fact, I didn't even think about it. It just started coming out of my fingers, automatically set in Baton Rouge. The main character changed from a man to a woman. The job of the main character changed before that a few times. Everything about it, the whole approach to the story. But the setting grabbed me, and even if there comes a time when I'm no longer writing these books about Wallace, I think I will still continue to set some books and some stories in this place, because it really is an interesting place. It's a beautiful place, but there is a very dangerous vibe that hangs over this city that unless you're there and you're sort of immersed in it, you're not going to feel it. And it's my goal to sort of get that out on the page for the reader to see.
Do you think that's why you chose crime fiction when you sat down to the page and started to write?
Crime fiction sort of chose me. I used to, as I mentioned, I used to be an academic, and I was walking to class one day. I was teaching a class on international business transactions. And out of nowhere, this question popped into my head about why is it that the South American cocaine cartels do a certain part of their business a particular way, when this other way I could think of seemed so much faster and cheaper and safer, especially from law enforcement. And I thought, well, sure, these are smart people. They have economists and meteorologists and agronomists and statisticians working for them. The cartels do. Yes, they do. So if it could be done, it probably would be the way they do it. So there's got to be a reason. So I did a little research, and I discovered that this thing I was thinking of, it can't be done. But what if someone could figure it out? What would that look like on the street as new winners and new losers in this very violent business were duking it out, and the local police were shooting it out, and the local police were having to deal with it? And that's where the idea to write this as a piece of crime fiction came from. It came out like a textbook the first time. It was awful, awful, awful. But eventually the story found me. So that's the short answer. I have a much longer answer.
I love that. We're probably, are we getting towards? Okay, great. So there you are. You're going to give it a high five?
Yeah, and just as a matter of, if anybody has a question, just Yeah, we don't need to wait for a particular
We're a
time.
little casual, as you
Yes.
can tell.
Spent 20 years in the classroom and nobody ever raised their hand. It was just a shouted out kind of thing, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Both of you reference your relationship with your editors and how valuable that is in moving things forward. But I wonder if there are times when you reach an impasse with your editors where you really diligently want to bring something into your story, but the editor does not, or vice versa. Does that manifest itself ever or often or not at all?
So the question is, basically when it comes to a tussle of you want something and your editor doesn't, who wins? Is that okay. His question was much more eloquent than that. And it's a good one because I respect my editor. I respect that she is trying to make this book the best it can possibly be. If something has hit her funny, there's a reason for it. But it's my book. It's my book. So if this is my world and I feel really strongly on it, I'm going to die on that hill for this, then I will. But like in Tear Me Apart, and it's in my acknowledgments that the dog doesn't eat people food because she freaked out on me. And in my manuscript, it's just normal edits and copy edits. And then there was this diatribe about the dog eating people food. I'm like, my parents feed their dog people food. Dog's going to eat people food. We did that on every round with the manuscript. And we, to the point, finally I'm on the last pass and I'm like, oh, fine. I'm going to take out the sprinkles of hamburger. And she was like, thank you. So I had to put it in the acknowledgments because it was just a silly, weird little thing. But the truth of the matter is it's my book. And if I want something in there and she doesn't agree, it's my book.
I am such a coward.
You'll learn.
If April
learn.
says cut it, I just put my finger on the delete key, take in a deep breath and push, and it's gone. But my agent told me, she said, there's a triangle in your world, new writer. At one corner is you, at the other corner is me, and at the top point is the editor. She said, if you and I get crosswise, life will go on. If I get crosswise with your editor, life will go on. But if you manage to mess up the channel between you and the editor, life as you know it will cease to go on. So if she says, you do, yes, ma'am. She said, I did.
I'm curious, JT, as I'm always curious about this, is why an author would choose to write under a pseudonym. I don't know if that's okay for me to ask that, but I'm asking.
You're more than welcome to. Just don't ask me my name. I could tell you and then I'd have to kill you. When I first submitted to my agent, I used my full name. My real name is a mouthful, and it's spelled weird, and my maiden name is bizarre. And so it was one of those situations where it's like, how are we going to fit all of this on a cover? And he said, what do you think about using JT? I'm like, well, that's what everybody has been calling me my whole life because my name is so hard to pronounce. So it was a very natural thing for me. There was also the element of they might think you're a man, which you would think, as much as I am out in the world, people would have figured out by now that I am a woman. I get email, Mr. Ellison, all the time. I can check into hotels and they're like, oh, is Mr. Ellison going to be joining you? Why, yes, he is. So it was a twofold. It was just easier, and it was also expedient for the industry at the time. And it's turned into, it's really actually kind of nice to write under your own nickname. Even my husband, when we were dating, dinner with JT, homework with JT. So it's just been a part of me forever.
There was another question on, yes, ma'am.
I want to ask you, you mentioned other professions as a lawyer and a teacher, and did you always want to write, or is that something you came to because you didn't like the other professions? Or is that
It's a good question. I actually have that written here.
There's a little bit of all of that. I wrote things as a kid, you know, the plays that we did in the neighborhood. I was the principal writer for we called it the Assault and Flattery Show when I was in law school, but it was basically just slander and libel against the law professors that we could get away with one time a year. At some point in my life, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to write comedy for television. And I tried, and it was just a miserable failure. But there's been some sort of bug in me to do this. One of my early academic jobs happened to be at a little college out in the West, and a member of the faculty was a famous science fiction writer from the Golden Age, Jack Williamson. And he would teach these classes every now and then, and I would take a few, and you know, you turn in the stuff, and it was not a for credit class. It was just sort of like for the community. And he was always patting me on the head. It's like, yeah, that's great, Roger, you know. Yeah, that's lovely stuff you got there. So I took that as a signal that I needed to keep teaching. But eventually I retired, and I was sitting at home, and I realized I had developed a bad case of OMD, old man disease. Get up when you wake up, read the paper, drink some coffee, take a nap. And my wife would look at me and never say anything, but you can read a look, right? Don't you want to do something? Anything? So I thought, well, okay, I'll try and write that book that I failed at for the last 7 years. And I did. I finally got serious about it when I had run out of options and other careers to distract me. So maybe that was all it took, 40 years and a lot of false trails. I did it the easy way.
Could you each tell us what your writing process is?
Yes. I get up in the morning, I do the business part first, you know, like catch up on social media or setting up book events for book tour, or if I'm editing a work in progress, I work on that. Then I do housework. I'm a house husband. I cook, I clean, I pay the kid who mows the lawn. And then in the afternoon, when I'm tired, is when I sit down to write, because I find that being tired is good for me. I've been a left brain kind of guy my whole life, you know, practicing the law, everything is ultra structured, and that is not so good for the writer. But when I'm tired, that strident, over-organized voice shuts up for a while, and I'm able to get a few things done. So
I am similar to that, though for different reasons. I am not a morning person at all. I'm a wolf. I am a stay up late, sleep in kind of girl, but that doesn't work in this world. So I get up, I read the paper with the cats in the bed, and so I'm awake, but I'm not up, and that works really well. And then I too do some business stuff in the morning because my brain doesn't really start cooking until the afternoon. But when I'm pushing on a deadline, I'm in the chair by 10 o'clock, and I write from 10 to 12, 12:30. I have a brief little lunch break, and then I'll really gear up at about 1:30, 2 o'clock, and 2 to 5:30, 6. That's my big push. My husband will come home. It's really hard on him because that's, you know, I should be stopping and cooking dinner and maybe brushing my hair, you know, putting on clothes, those kinds of things. And there are times when he'll wander in at, you know, 7 or 8 o'clock, and I'm still sitting there tapping away because I've just gotten on a roll. But it sounds very undisciplined, but I shoot for 1,000 words a day, which is about 5 pages. And to get started, I sit down at I go back to what I wrote the day before, and I edit that and I flesh that out. And sometimes I'll go back even further. And so I'm kind of circling and circling and circling and then pushing forward. If I've got 1,000 words by noon, it's going to be a good day. I can tell.
Oh, one more thing that I do, and this is the anxiety part, is right before my wife gets home, I run into the back and change out of my pajamas into regular clothes so she'll think I'm a normal person.
See, 22 books in, I don't care. I have really cute yoga clothes, and that's what I live in.
Do you have to know the ending before you start?
I hope not. Truly, when I know the end, it is 1,000 times more difficult for me. I am a very organic writer. I am not a plotter. I'm a pantser, as they call it. I like to write by the seat of my pants. My greatest joy in life is when I end up the day in a place that I hadn't expected, or a new character has walked onto the page, speaking Spanish, and I'm like, who are you? Why and who? And I mean, that's literally happened to me. Brand new people. And that, to me, that's the exciting part. The book that I'm working on now, I know the end. And I have been struggling mightily because I have to get to the end. And so it's the kiss of death for me when I know what's going to happen. What about you?
Exactly the opposite. I have to know what I'm shooting at. But that said, I'm sort of a discovery writer. I know the beginning and I know the end, but I don't know how I'm going to get from one spot to the other. So it's a lot of running down this trail and that's not going to work. So I'll agonize over it and sort of give it a burial, a blessing, and then shove it off and try another route. And sometimes I realize I'm writing stuff that I'm going to get rid of, but I have to write it because I have to become familiar with the people and the places who are not going to be on stage, but they're going to be supporting the ideas and the that get me to where it is that the book needs to go. So, yes?
I want to know, how did you edit the 90,000 words quickly? How did you get rid of the tense or change that?
We kept finding little pieces of it through the editorial process. It was literally just sit down and take it apart word by word. Changing it to present tense wasn't nearly as hard, because that was in what I call close third. So you're in third person, it's hers and she's and her name and everything, versus first person, which is I, and you're in that character. That's what's been the challenge for me, is changing the third person to the first person. I always say I write close third so closely that I could just switch the she to an I. Yeah, that's not true. Oh my God, all of these myths I've been telling myself all these years are wrong. It is a completely different approach. So, but it was just a matter of, doing it. You do the work. That's, I've written I'm on my 22nd book I got really started in 2004 is when I really got started, and I got published in 2007. And it's because I just do the work. I love it. It's my job. I treat it as a job. I treat it seriously. I treat it as a career.
Sure.
Which, that's, I'm incredibly blessed that that's what it's turned into. You just never know. You never know when you're starting if you're going to have longevity at this or not. But I was determined to make that happen. And so you just put yourself in the chair and do the work. It's as simple and as hard as that.
Are there any characteristics that any of your big characters have, that they just insist on having that you don't like about them?
He asks good questions.
And I'm going to be trying to take notes on this one too, because I'm learning a lot today.
That's a very difficult question, because I think the impulse is to make everyone like you, especially when you're starting out. And that's why so many debut authors write in first person, because it's so much easier to be in someone's head and write their experiences as they happen. to have somebody doing, I mean, I write about horrible things. I write about, not as much anymore, serial killers, people that do bad things. I'm fascinated by the horrible things that people do to each other. I mean, we can be pretty awful. As good as we can be and as lovely and wonderful and hold each other up, we can be pretty awful too. So having to inhabit those people, John Connolly once said that every character has a little bit of him in it.
Mhm.
And I have to look at it like that. Whatever I have cooked up, it's because there's something in my own psyche that I either need to work through or I've thought about or I've had a horrible dream about or whatever. And I've got to find a way to do that. So I may not like the guy who locks the girl in a glass coffin in the basement, but he has a cat, and so I can totally relate to him. I mean, if you have an irredeemable character, they have to have something that you can root for, or else these books wouldn't work. People aren't reading them for the salacious murders. They're reading for the psychological underpinnings. And
Yes.
that's, you know, so that's a really roundabout and probably didn't really answer your question.
No, it did. Like my main character, she's very unforgiving of herself. She's hard on herself in some ways, and that bothers me. I wish she weren't that way, but I don't know what to do about it.
I would assume that there is a part of you who is pretty hard on yourself, or else you wouldn't have achieved the things that you have achieved as a lawyer, as an academic, as a writer.
Well, right. You don't inflict lawyer on anyone you really love. That's true. Exactly right. No, I think there's some truth to that things creep in from our, sort of the edges of our emotional solar system and start to inhabit the parts of the characters. But I think about that. I wonder about that all the time as I read your books, as I read other books by other authors. When am I seeing parts of them, and when am I seeing something that's totally, just a confabulation? And do they experience these dissatisfactions with the way their characters insist on being the same way I do? And I hope they do in a sense, because I think it's easier to write a character that you disagree with sometimes than it might be someone that you're just totally simpatico with. But, I don't know. Yes?
Some of your books you write with Catherine Colson. Yeah, I know I was trying to say it. How does that differ from your other books that you write by yourself?
It's actually very, so the question was, I do co-write with Catherine Coulter. We have a series called The Brit and the FBI, which is a big international James Bondy kind of series. It's very fun, very over the top. Unfortunately, both of us are very organic writers. So when we first got together, we kind of got a little far afield on the first book, because and we realized we're going to actually have to outline this, and ooh, neither one of us. But we did, and the books that we outline go a lot better than the books that we don't, especially because unlike with me and my editor, it's my book, it's her book. This is her book. She drives the bus. She's the brand. She's the bigger name on the cover, and so she wins. If we have a dispute, she wins, and we have disputes all the time. But it's that's something that I have to just walk away from. But it's difficult for both of us to have to plan and plot and figure this out. And I always find that we think we have a 96 chapter outline, but what we really have is the first 15 and the last 2. And so I get down there and I'm in the trenches trying to write this, and I realize we're missing like 50 chapters. Oh God. And so I have to get on the phone with her. I'm like, all right, here's what I think we should do. And she says yeah or nay, and we go from there. Every co-writing collaboration is very, very different. Some the author gives you an outline and that you go right from that. Some you switch off personalities or characters. Some, the author doesn't care, and so you write the book and they go off and do their thing. They're all very, very different. She and I are very collaborative. It's been very team-oriented, and it's been a lot of fun. They're fun. Thank you. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Nicely done.